Let's dive in then.
Let's do it.
So the most obvious question, which was obviously going to be my first one, was where did the inspiration for the book come from? And I know that you give a beautiful explanation on your website. There is a recording of you explaining your inspiration. And so I mean, it summed it up perfectly, but I would love if you wouldn't mind, if you could repeat it, if you could let us know, or unless there's more being added. But yeah, what inspired you? How did you write this?
Of course, Lauren. I know. I think, how did I write this book? And I'm like, my God, do we all have 12 years for me to dive into the Russian poem that is? I think how any book gets written is kind of a whole life story. But to put everybody at ease, that's not what we'll do today. I think there's sort of different ways to answer this question, and I think that the truest one is that this book found me way before I was ready for it to find me. It was 2018. I had just sent off the final edits of my first novel to my Australian publisher, Catherine. And we had done approximately 483 million drafts of edits. So I think I stopped counting. Genuinely, I think I stopped counting at about the 17th round of edits on my first novel. Wow. And so by the time we sort of went to final edit, my brain had been so deeply in that story, and also in all of the emotions, with it being my first novel and it being a story that comes very much from my own life and body and story. And Catherine saying to me, that's it, we're done. The next step is we go to print. It was bewildering to me. And I remember really clearly, she said to me, you can go and read for pleasure now. Because while I was deep in the world of that book, I was reading about Australian native flowers, for example, or I was reading about the coastline where I grew up, or the desert in Australia where I lived, because I wrote the entire first draft at my desk in Manchester. But I wasn't reading for pleasure. So I went into my office after I'd sent off the manuscript, and I was home alone, and I made a cup of tea, and it felt a little bit like, I don't know, I was doing something forbidden and mischievous, because I was looking at my bookshelves full of my to be read file, which honestly could circumnavigate the earth. And I noticed the title that jumped out at me from the shelves was a book of Swedish fairy tales by a writer named Helena Nyblom. My people, my ancestors that I descend from, are Celtic and Scandinavian. So in my first sort of few months when I arrived in Manchester back in 2009, there were always these amazing just pop-up book markets on Oxford Road going through the university precinct. And those guys selling those books know what they're doing, because all of the university students walking past who love books, who have no money for books or room or space, we were always in there like magpies picking over everything. And I bought this book of Swedish fairy tales. So 5 years later, here I am. And I finally pull it down off my bookshelf, and I think to myself, yes, a Swedish fairy tale. This comes from the region of my ancestors. This is exactly what I need. I know what I'm going to get. It's going to be Once Upon a Time. It's going to be probably damsel in distress. It's going to be probably some golden-haired boy rocks up and saves everything. But I was like, you know what? it's predictable and it will be magical, and that's fine. That's what I need to remember how to read and to ease my brain back into things. I open the book and decide to read the fairy tale that I open the book on, and it's a story called All the Wild Waves. And a shiver went down my back. I am a woman who was raised a block from the Pacific Ocean on the Aboriginal country called Bundjalung country in the southeast corner of Queensland in Australia. I was a block from the sea at all times. If I had to put on socks in wintertime, that heralded a bitter, cold winter season. So the sea has very much always been a part of my making, my upbringing. And I just got this shiver down my spine when I saw the title, and I sat down on the floor in my office with my cup of tea, and I thought, right, I'm just going to sit here with nothing to do but read this story. Very briefly, the story is about a woman named Violanta who is growing up in the mountains with her mother and brother, and she lives beside a stream. And Violanta's whole desire for her whole life is to get to the sea. She looks at the stream one day, and the stream tells her that it runs all the way to the waves. It runs all the way to the ocean. So Violanta decides to leave everything she knows in the night and follow this stream to get to the sea. Along the way, she is offered a hand in marriage, a really good job in a flour mill. She comes across a woman who has her own home and garden and books and trees. And this woman's name is Penserosa. And she has crystals, and there are butterflies in the garden. And this story was published in 1910. So Penserosa is an independent woman, but the thing about Penserosa that Violanta discovers is that she can't use her legs. She is maimed from the knee down, because God forbid in 1910 we were single women with our own agency and we had the use of our legs. So Penserosa offers Violanta a place in her house with her library and all of the magic. And Violanta thinks about it, and she thinks, I must get to the sea. It's all I want with my life. So I'm going to give you a small spoiler. Violanta gets to the sea finally, and she walks towards the ocean, and she outreaches her arms, and the waves rise up, and she is full of yearning, and the waves turn black and green, and they start screaming at her, do you know us now? And then the final scene of the fairy tale is Violanta's body lying lifeless in the ocean because the sea has killed her.
Wow. I was not expecting that.
I threw the book. I threw it. And the spine hit the wall, and my heart was pounding, and I felt slapped. I felt slapped by the fairy tale. I did pick up the book and stroke it very apologetically thereafter, but the resounding feeling that I had following that shiver down my spine was, oh my God, this is the heart of the next novel.
Oh,
from there, I started reading about Helena Nyblom, and she was a Scandinavian fairy tale writer that was part of a collective of female artists at the time in Scandinavia who have become to be known in English as the Masked Collective or the Masked Artists. And these were women who are known to have embedded feminist messages in their work. So remembering that in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, for the same reason that all the Bronte sisters gave themselves masculine names to get published, Helena Nyblom was embedding fairy tales about women being punished for having desire and ambition in amongst stories for children. So you flick to the story either side in this collection of Swedish fairy tales, and it's like, The one before All the Wild Waves is like, oh, the golden haired princess like walked outside and birds like landed on her shoulders. And the one after it is like, one day there was a little sprite that, went to, everything that we're used to, all the tropes that we know so well, and embedded in amongst it is this warning tale, this cautionary tale of a woman who followed her heart and surrendered nothing to follow her dream, and she paid the ultimate price for it. And so I started knowing that so many of my ancestors are Danish and come from Copenhagen. Just in that geeky way that we have, I was sitting at my desk reading about Helena Nyblom. Everything is telling me she's Swedish. I'm thinking, oh God, I wish she was Danish. In that way that I was like plotting my stories of my Danish ancestors, that I grew up at my granny's kitchen table in Queensland hearing about their emigration from Copenhagen, spending 3 months on a boat, sailing to Queensland. And the clincher of that story is that there was my ancestral grandmother was on board with a coat, and she hid a baby that wasn't on passenger lists in her coat. And the story I heard at Granny's table to my fairy tale loving kid mind was, oh my God, she was a seal woman. She was a selkie. That was her seal skin, and she hid her baby. So all of this is swirling in my head as I'm researching Helena Nyblom. And I'm thinking, as I'm reading about her, I wish she was Danish, because that story of my ancestors was really sort of rising to the front of my mind while I was reading about her. And then I discovered that it's only history that remembers Helena Nyblom as Swedish, because she married a Swede. She was born and bred in Copenhagen. She grew up with Hans Christian Andersen coming to visit her father for tea. And then I'm sitting there and I had this image of this woman hiding feminist texts in stories. And all of a sudden I saw her in her Victorian dress up to her neck and down to her wrists and ankles. And underneath I had this flash of her covered in tattoo symbols of her fairy tales. And I'm thinking about sealskins, and I'm thinking about my ancestral grandmother hiding a baby from the passenger lifts in her coat to emigrate from Denmark to Australia. And I just Googled, where is the oldest operating tattoo parlor in the Western world? And the answer was in Nyhavn in Copenhagen. Lauren, I laid out on the floor of my office. I had so much fear in my head about, writing a second book, and everybody already saying to me, what's next, when I hadn't even finished the first. But all of this happened in this magical, wild, crazy day of following gingerbread crumbs and the stories from my childhood and my ancestors sort of rising to meet those crumbs. And it really just blew my mind. So that was the beginning of the
Incredible.
7 Pins of Esther Wilding. And that was the genesis.
It's incredible. It's a beautiful sort of coming together of your own personal, history or family, the ancestry, the line, alongside feminism and folklore and fairy tales and your own storytelling as well. It's just this, like I say, this beautiful sort of swirling cocktail of all of these brilliant ingredients that no wonder I adore this book. It's just got everything. It does. I promised myself I try not to gush too much when talking to you, because your book, because I could talk for hours. I could. And it's not about me. I have to remember that. But
Lauren, it is about you. I'm not here without you. Let me just get that very straight.
Please. And I just, the book itself, and one of my questions, I'm sorry if it's not on my list, but as we're talking,
No,
I've just,
absolutely.
it's what resonates with readers. And as you are, on the festival circuit at the moment, and all of the promotion involved, I'm sure the answer is that it resonates in different ways for different people, and that you get that firsthand feedback from readers. And I can't begin to imagine how special that is. And even, when I was reading it, like, I find it difficult to put into words exactly why it resonated with me. Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I have a sister? In the book, I'm going to desperately try and avoid spoilers, but, explores siblings, that sisterhood. Is it, no, I can't, I'm desperate to try and avoid these spoilers. Why does it resonate?
Yeah.
And what is it? Why do you think it does? What is the most common answer, I would say?
It's such a beautiful question, and it's the gift that readers give me, actually, because I only know how to write if I write from the place inside of myself that is sore with the truth, the painful, beautiful truth of being a human. Because to be human means that we love and we lose, and I can only write from that place. And underneath that place is the source inside of me of the fact that I've wanted to be a writer and have loved stories since my amazing, beautiful mum gave me the gift of teaching me to read when I was 3 years old. So I can't read my own work in a sense. I can write it and I know where it comes from in me, but the magic that Carl Sagan talks about in, with books being what they are, the reason that books are proof that humans are capable of working magic is that it all starts with a tree. The tree becomes paper. The paper is something I put marks on. Those marks go out to other people, which they read and gives them pictures and emotions in their head. And then they take that into their body. And that story becomes something that means something to them. In that way, that's how Esther and the Seven Skins of Esther Wilding, that's how Esther's story takes life. That's how she lives and breathes. And the things readers have told me about what this book means to them has taken the place that it came from in my body, in my life, because stories are very embodied to me. My stomach churns while I'm writing them. My temples pound. I get sweaty palms. I cry. I laugh. I sweat. Like, I get emotion sweat. So it does very much come from my body, and readers tell me that what they feel, and this is what blows my mind, what they feel while they're reading it is very similar to what I feel while I'm writing it, but the meaning of the story takes on sort of galaxies to them that I could never have imagined. I think what resonates about this novel is the fact that joy and grief are not something we can disentangle from our human experience. If we can't selectively numb what we feel. If we numb ourselves to grief, it means we also will numb ourselves to feeling the full vastness of joy and the power of believing that we are worthy of accepting and feeling good love. So I think that's a core thing that people respond to. The book is also about what happens when we make decisions with the best of intentions, but they nevertheless are fueled by shame. And the book is about what happens when those decisions mean that we're keeping secrets from the people closest to us because there is too much painful shame and vulnerability involved in speaking the truth about what we've lived, what we've experienced, what we fear, what troubles us about who we are, and even how hard it is sometimes to have the courage to say what we want in the world without fear or guilt choking us and convincing us that we're not worthy. And I think finally there's that theme that so many of us can relate to, of just worrying that we're not enough, that we can't live full lives because we can't possibly be enough to be worthy of feeling fully, feeling with all of us, feeling all of grief, to process it, to love what we've lost, to grieve what we've lost, and feeling the joy of what can still come in that loss, and how powerful letting ourselves love and be loved is. Also, the power of a bloody good 80s party, the power of Shearer, the power of how we choose to tell our stories, the fact that even when stories are too painful for us to verbally tell them, we still find our ways. Like it's really interesting to me, in my first novel, the way that people told their stories was through a language of Australian native flowers. In my second novel, and this wasn't planned, the way women tell their stories is through tattooing as a form of storytelling. So I think all of these themes are why readers have given me the gift of telling me what these characters and how Esther's journey has become alive and meant something profound to them. And the messages that I receive, they completely destroy me. Like some of them just leave me like, I need to just lie down with a cup of tea and a heat pillow in my eyes to just sort of process with
incredible
deep gratitude and awe.
That
I just talked about all of that without one spoiler, Lauren.
That is impressive. Forget everything else. But I think, I mean, when it comes to fiction, when it comes to stories, and we love stories. I'm in publishing. You obviously are kind of good at writing, but there's this love, this passion for the story, right? And it's something that whatever stage, whatever age of you are, it's something that surrounds us, whether that's books or in the media. And I think then as you grow up, those two key themes, joy and grief, we as humans experience, for most people, both of those things at different times, in different ways. And I think the beautiful thing about fiction, the beautiful thing about stories, is that no matter who you are and where you live and what stage you are at in life, reading connects you, and it can connect up all of these different minds all around the world, and it can teach you about empathy. You can learn so much from fiction. And I think perhaps that's, for me anyway, one of the most stunning things about your novel is that I felt as though it was tailor-made. I felt as though I was reading and you were talking to me and I was reflecting, and it really, if anything, feeling like I was being seen and felt, connected is a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's something I genuinely treasure. And I only hope that more and more readers have that experience, because there is nothing better than feeling seen and being seen. So I think, with a novel, to be able to do that that escapism, that thing that you pick up to just sort of step out of life for a moment, if it can speak to you in a way that can then connect you back to your everyday and give you strength, yes, I only hope that more and more readers get to experience
Oh,
that.
that's so beautiful. Thank you for saying that. That will never. God, if
No,
we've been
honestly.
on for 4 minutes, and I'm going to start sobbing, and I'm going to offend everyone's like British emotional capacity within our first 4 minutes on the podcast. I've
But
been
don't
in
make me
Australia for
cry.
two.
I'm the
I've been in
Brit.
Australia for too long. I know. I've forgotten how to hold myself together. Uh, I think what you're saying is so spot on about the power of. I mean, all good writing, I think, has that power to it. And by good writing, I mean something that has come from a true place in the writer. I'm not talking about technical ability or anything that
Mm-hmm.
bad. I think good writing is when it comes from a true place in the person that's writing whatever the piece is about. And specifically with fiction, one of my favorite authors since I was 21 is Alice Hoffman. And she is the novelist who has taught me that fiction is emotional truth. Fiction can tell emotional truth in a way that perhaps no other form of writing or storytelling can, because it is unencumbered, it is free. That emotional truth is free to pour onto the page because it is unconstrained in fiction, it lives in fiction. And there's another American author named Tom Spanbauer who lives in my mind, who talks about fiction is the lie that allows us to tell the truth truest. And
Amazing.
those two things encapsulate for me what the power of fiction can do to our inner lives and how that flows through into our outer lives. Because, as you were saying, we are hardwired as human beings to make sense of being alive through story. And sometimes the most powerful story that can hold a light up to things that we don't know or can't understand about ourselves, or to feeling unseen or feeling alone, is fiction, because it is a story that allows us to take our own imaginations into it. And in that imaginary landscape, we are free and safe to feel in a way that we maybe aren't in other aspects of our life. So I
Absolutely.
there just couldn't be anything more meaningful, honestly, to know that all I've ever wanted to do since I was a kid was write stories that matter to me, that might matter to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And to know, and right from the beginning, right from when you and I have first met with Esther, to know that you love her and feel her and all of the characters in her story and the journey that she goes from Lutruwita, which is Tasmania, to Copenhagen, to the Faroe Islands. That just makes all of it just so meaningful. It's just
Wow.
everything that I at least crave as a writer, because it doesn't live if I just write it. Esther lives when she's read. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
But I
thank
think,
you.
if for anybody who will be listening who hasn't read it yet, yes, we've talked about these emotions and the journey, side of it, but it also, I mean, the book made me laugh.
Yes,
I was there alongside her. I was traveling, going to these different
yes.
places I've never been to, and I mean, it just ticks all of these different boxes for so many different reasons that I think readers, like I say, from anywhere at any point, will take something from it, will gain something from it.
Oh, I
and
hope so.
um and that's what I look for, whether I'm reading, for work or for pleasure,
Yes.
just what that kind of, yeah, what can I, the selfish part of me is sort of like, okay, but how can I
Mm,
sort of, connect with this? And
mm,
and that's exactly what the book does, you know.
mm,
What I also wanted to sort of ask you about, because obviously we're talking about book lovers and readers
mm,
and so on, and as I say, you're sort of in the deep end with the promotion side of it at the moment as well.
mm.
But then also the very exciting news about the Amazon Prime series for your first novel. I mean,
Oh, yes.
how how does your mind wrap around the fact that there's going to be a visual, interpretation of your novel as
No,
well?
no, no,
No.
no.
No, yeah, that's pretty much what I thought.
So, uh, I'm sure that being the book lover that you are and the creative spirit that you are, and anybody who is listening to us who has that little creative fire in their heart, no matter how small or large it is, there is a really universal truth that many of us have probably experienced in our lives where somebody in the world or the world has asked us who we are. And maybe we were very young when we answered that we were artists, or in my case, I want to grow up and be a writer. Like, I want to be a writer when I'm big. And the world is not kind to brave souls that put those things into words, because there is the very common and, in many ways, I suppose, sound response of, something along the lines of, oh, that's cute, but what's your real job going to be?
Mhm,
Or
mhm,
what are you going to do for a day job? Like, not
mhm,
everybody gets to be a la-di-da writer or a professional chef or a dancer or a gardener designer, anything
mhm,
that is
mhm,
underpinned by creativity. The point being that I think I got sick of being um, shut down when I was answering that question. By the time I was kind of in grade 11 or 12, and the school guidance counselor, I was a teenager, I was raised by an incredible single mum, and she came to school. And it was like, I think it was my senior year of high school, and the guidance counselor was like, now Holly has her best marks in English, maths not so much. And mum and I were like, moving right along, thank you. And the guidance counselor was like, Holly says on her form here that she wants to be a writer, but that's a really tough nut to crack. So I suggest that she studies teaching at university and becomes a teacher. So even in that moment where that is very sound advice, figures of authority, in the final time that I dared to say that aloud, figures of authority never said, you go for that. You write like your life depends on it, and you love the joy that you get out of it. Also, you're going to need to pay rent and clothe and feed yourself and be safe. So, like, here are options for how we could balance the thing that sustains you with the job that's going to help you.
mhm,
The point of all of this, Lauren, being that I wrote The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart when I was 34 years old in Manchester. I had finished my MA of creative writing at the University of Manchester years before. Well, when I say years, about 2.5 years
mhm,
before I'd graduated. And there's so much expectation, in particular after graduating in MA. It's like, and now I will, and here is the novel, ta-da! And it
mhm,
didn't happen like that for me. And I wrote The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. Um, I finally crossed the line, excuse me, between absolute strangling procrastination and action. I crossed that line between the two. Finally, it took, and sadly, it took somebody beloved in my family dying and me being with them in hospital as they died to shake me out of fear's shackles, because I was so terrified of failing as a writer. I was so terrified of rejection, of humiliation, of finding out I wasn't good enough, of finding out I wasn't smart enough to do this thing that I've known about myself since I was a kid. Who would I be if I tried to write a book and it all went tits up? And then who am I? And then what do I do? And so I didn't try, because, and it wasn't for lack of trying, it was just so chronic in me, the fear, that my brain could not speak to my hand to move my pen or to tap out at my keyboard. My imagination was this deeply hidden away thing that I just couldn't access. And it was the death of a family member that finally made me realize how incredibly dangerous and how incredibly boring fear is, because it's just asking us to not try. It's just saying, stop and you're safe. Stop, don't risk it. And so in the madness of my grief in 2014, I was 34, and this person who had died, he was like one of my biggest champions. And the last lucid thing he said to me was, if you can't write this novel, because he knew that I wanted to write this story that was circling me and was in me. And he said, if you can't write this novel for you, you must write it for those of us who are invested in you. That was the last thing he said to me. No pressure.
Wow.
Thanks, beloved.
Wow.
Thanks, beloved. And so grieving him and feeling the full weight of the madness of grief in that moment, I went into my office in Manchester, and the fear that I was living with was underpinned by years, decades of post-traumatic stress that stemmed from having lived a lot of my life in cycles of male perpetrated violence. And so the trauma that I carried from living cyclically around and with violent men came with me into my life after I swore that no man would lay a finger on me again. That's what the fear was underpinned by. 2014, at my desk in the madness of grief about losing this family member, I go into my office. I sit there and I say to myself, looking out at the silver birch trees through my window and the red bricks of Manchester, and I said to myself, 10 minutes. What would happen if for 10 minutes you didn't listen to how shit you are and how much you can't do this? What would happen if you just tried to come from that space inside you that loves stories? What if you let that kid sit down at this desk who loved stories? Lauren, I swear to God, I watched my hand. I'd done everything right. Like, I had the moleskin. I had the fountain pen. Hemingway had a moleskin. I was like, well, if Hemingway had a moleskin, I need a moleskin. Like, I did everything. I don't know why I was taking advice from dead white guys, but there we are. And so I remember really clearly taking the cap off my fountain pen and watching my hand. And it really did feel like I was outside of myself, watching my hand. And I watched myself write this sentence at the weatherboard house. Start that again. Cut, Olivia. And I watched myself write this sentence. In the weatherboard house at the end of the lane, 9-year-old Alice Hart sat at her desk by the window and dreamed of ways to set her father on fire. So that is the moment. And I sat back and I thought, holy shit, what is this? That was 2014, Lauren. I wrote the book from 2014 to 2016. I wrote it by convincing myself no one would read it, but that I just really needed to put it on paper because I believed in it. I have a really, really beautiful friend in my life who is also an author, and she was in Europe on book tour at the time. Her name's Brooke Davis. And Brooke came and stayed with me in Manchester, and she read the first 3 chapters, and she said to me, I really want to send these to my agent. She sent them to her agent. Her agent became my agent. It turned out that no one reading my book is not true, because The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart has been published in 30 territories around the world. And in a very short while, it is going to be on Amazon Prime as a 7-episode series starring Sigourney Weaver.
I mean, honestly, come on.
And Lauren, I mean, I'm just close now to making whale sonar noises, like to try and express. And the reason why I talk about where, like, the reason why I share that origin story, if you like, and the reason why I share all of this is because none of this has happened overnight. This is so unlikely that it would ever be anything that would happen to me. And it all, you can trace it all back to all the small decisions that you make. Choosing to leave a relationship that was bad for me, the last one that would be bad for me.
Mm-hmm.
Choosing to move to England to follow my dream of becoming a writer and starting my life over again, and trying to find my way back to myself after that relationship, and studying the MA at the University of Manchester. And all education is a privilege, and it shouldn't be, but it is. And I had life savings from my work at home in Australia that I used to put myself through school. That was an incredible privilege, but I didn't come to England to do the MA because I thought that would make me a novelist. I came to England to do the MA because I was just terrified of falling through the floor of my own life.
Mm-hmm.
And if I just followed that dream and had that structure, that maybe I could see what I could become if I listened to that one thing that I've known about myself that's never changed no matter what's happened to me, which was wanting to write and wanting to tell stories. So the fact now that we're sort of so close to this series being launched on Amazon Prime and I mean, it's not just Sigourney Weaver, the entire cast is unbelievable. It's, Asha Keddy, Leah Purcell, Alicia Debnam Carey, Frankie Adams. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And I think sedatives are the way. I think sedatives are the future.
That's the only way,
Lauren. I think I'll be texting you, dropping like some sort of pill with my glass of wine, when
I mean, I
the show
completely
launches.
agree. Yeah. I just, commend your bravery, because I think I am sorry that you have experienced pain and loss. Of course, as a human to another human, I would never wish it upon anybody.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't want to say, I don't want to make it sound sort of superficial, but the incredible positive from that, has been this, what appears to be this strength, this incredible strength that you have. And that, as I say, that bravery to take the plunge and, yes, address that constant that had been inside you for as long as you can remember, and just look at what was the result of that, and continue the ripple effect, as I said before, about connecting readers. We are all just people trying to get along at the end of the day, just trying to deal the cards we're dealt. And some people get dealt a very difficult hand, and it's all different to different people. It's all relative, isn't it? So it's also then where you go with that. And I think there is something really beautiful to be found in grief, in
I
the
agree.
hard
I
times, you
agree.
know, and I would never wish it upon somebody. I am not saying that you
No.
can only be a great human if you have suffered, you know, I'm not saying any of those things. All I am trying to poorly articulate is that if there is any positive to be taken from these, you know, cards that you're dealt, then just look at the way that you can shine. Just look at what it can then make you into, and that self-reflection, that kind of looking in on yourself and thinking, okay, this is my situation. This is what's happening. This is what's happened, whatever it may be. Where do I go from here? And there's a lot of courage to be taken from that. So,
and it's quite ancient, I think, this idea, like the Roman philosophers used to talk about the wound is the way, you know, the obstacle is the way. And I couldn't agree more about, I mean, while we are in grief, while we are displaced by grief, while we are making horrendously bad decisions for ourselves, as our beloved Esther does in, you know, the first few chapters of the novel, because she is operating fully out of grief and not out of feeling or managing the grief, it is almost impossible to sit with yourself and to say there is going to be beauty that is going to come out of this. There will be strength, there will be courage. I will know myself at a level that I didn't know myself before because of this. I mean, in my experience of grief, I don't want to think about any of that when you're in it. You just want it to be over. But the irrefutable truth that people who have gone through the most unfathomable horrors, when they emerge on the other side of the horrors, and that's not to say that they have recovered from it or they have healed from it, but when they are not in the crisis point of it, so many talk about the gifts and the wisdom that are found in that unfathomable adversity. And, you know, Frida Kahlo said, at the end of the day, we can endure so much more than we think we can. And now is the part of our podcast chat where I get to quote Pearl Jam, which is what 1992 me, that's what 12-year-old me lives for. But there is a Pearl Jam song that I always think about, where the lyrics are, I have tasted a life wasted, and I am never going back again. And that, the fuel and the beauty and the joy of that is to taste a life wasted. You know what that is. You know it. To live it and know it means that you have the experience of it, and that's an education. And I will never go back again. I will never go back to living a life wasted. I think if there is any value in our hearts being clawed to pieces by the things that happen to us by the mere virtue of being alive and being human, it is that we learn more about our capacity, and we learn how we might be wrong about ourselves. I 15 years ago, I didn't think I was brave. 15 years ago, I didn't think I was strong. And 15 years later, and all the versions of me through that time, I don't tell myself that I'm not brave and not strong anymore. And that's incredible. That's a gift.
I was just about to say, what an amazing gift. What a gift. And you are right. When you are in it, you can't see that. And it's a process. It is a process to come to terms with, when you are, you know, wading through the thick of grief. And or hardship of any kind. But when you
Of
are in
any
the
kind,
yeah, it's very, very difficult to see. But to, you know, and with the novel, if anyone can take from it that that self-worth, I think, is what I wish more people would have, you know, that feeling of yes, okay, like you say, you are human, these things will come at you, you know, you can't control what you will go through to a certain extent.
Yes. Yes.
But to have that inner strength, that self-worth, you know, is something that yeah, of course, you know, if we all had it from an early age, that would be great. But to whatever stage, then learn that, I think, is invaluable. And that's the gift, I think, that you can be given, to find that strength and to think, okay, yeah, I'm not the same person I was before, but aren't I pretty damn awesome now? Like,
Yes.
and there's still
Yes.
tomorrow. We're not, you know, we're not
Yes.
gone yet. We've still got
We're
more time.
never. That's right. And that was something that underpinned a lot of the story development as I was writing Esther, because something that she shares with her dad, Jack, is this love of the stars. And they sit in a star shack together in Tasmania and they watch the different constellations. And Esther, you know, she grew up in the beautiful shadow, but the shadow, nevertheless, of her beloved older sister, Aura, you know, always feeling like so many younger siblings do, like just constantly running after Aura, constantly calling out, wait for me. Like, I don't want to be left behind, wait for me. And so at this inevitable tipping point in Esther and Aura's siblinghood, when Aura is sort of going into her teens and Esther is still a child and she's not physically developing at the same rate and that sort of thing, their dad, Jack, comes up with the idea that he's going to create Space Club to try and make that cool for Esther, to be like, oh, I've got Space Club, even though Aura's like going to parties, like,
yeah.
So and one of the things that really underpins the story development through everyone, and that I try to bring to the page through mentions of the stars and Space Club and conversations that Esther has with many different people about either the stars or even the DNA in old stories, in old fairy tales, is that none of us are fixed. None of us are a still point. We are always changing, and change is always possible. And it might not be wanted. We might not want to change, and it might feel really hard. But there is a freedom that we can give ourselves when we choose to feel the fullness of something as hard and terrifying to reckon with as grief, because we are grieving something that we cannot bear, something that we have lost, something that has traumatized us, and we can't bear to process that. We can't bear to feel the fullness of it because it's horrible. And at the same time, it's sort of like a cosmic payoff for being human. If you can find the will to feel those depths of grief, the payoff is that you also can feel the depths of joy, even if it's in the most fleeting of moments, even if it's the quietest moment where not a lot happens, but it's an exchange with somebody dear to you. And that joy can flood you. But you can't feel that flood if you are numbed, if you have numbed and tapped out of your life. And the change that's always happening is, if we can find the courage to feel the fullness of the things that are really hard and unbearable, it means that we are likely going to feel the fullness of the things that give us resilience to keep going for, like joy and love and beauty. And in that way, change happens. In that way, we transform ourselves. And I think it's so freeing when we feel stuck to remember that no matter how much it feels so, we are never fully as fixed in place as we think we are. We are not still points. We are moving all the time.
And that's what a ride, what a joyful roller coaster that we are all on, because but that realization as well, it makes you then value the good times even more when they are happening, because we are always changing and things are always moving.
Exactly.
There's so much that perspective. I think that's the key.
There's an incredible writer, Karen Walrond, who says that, and I'll paraphrase her here, but she says that she will never apologize for celebrating joy and beauty in her life and in the world, because that's what fuels her activism. That's how she continues to show up for herself and others. And I think there is so much in that for everybody. I think there's so much truth in that for all of us.
I mean, I could happily just keep talking about all of this. I find it so fascinating, but obviously, we are talking about the book. We are, talking about Esther, but I feel like we can elevate that to exactly what we're doing now, and talking about life and people and just, living, and how to make it just that bit more bearable sometimes,
Yes, absolutely. That we are allowed to give ourselves joy. Like, we are allowed to do things that bring us joy. We are allowed to say yes. We are allowed to say yes to doing what Esther does and going to Copenhagen. And we can say yes to following her nose and essentially being sort of low-key creepy and turning up in the Faroe Islands to tell her sister's entire network of people that she's there, but doesn't give them a heads up. She just rocks up. And she does that because something in her gut is like, there is goodness here and you have to follow it.
Just be brave.
There is such an enormous power in being brave and saying yes, and saying yes without guilt and shame, being in the driver's seat.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wanted to talk about the cover with you, the beautiful illustrations. I wanted to talk about even, inside the book with the gorgeous, drawings at the start of each chapter. I wanted to talk about tattooing and exactly what you were saying before about, expressing, the storytelling as a sort of visual representation of that. I feel like there is so much more to talk about. I am conscious of time though, Olivia. I don't know how.
Maybe we do part 2.
Maybe we do part 2.
Yeah. I can split it into 10 parts.
Yeah, I'm up for that if you are, Holly.
Oh my God. You tell me you want to do a 10-part podcast series, and I'm like, I'm there.
Okay, 10-part podcast. We're just throwing around some ideas. Amazing. Well, maybe we end it here then, and we'll chat about maybe having another chat
that sounds
about
beautiful.
all those other bits and pieces.
In terms of maybe
say again, Holly, sorry.
I was just going to say, in terms of maybe listeners getting a sense of me, maybe, and I can, like, it might work either way, the feel of who I am or something. And then the next chat that we have, maybe after the book comes out, even, where we can go into spoilers and give people a spoiler warning and say, we're going to talk about the cover, we're going to talk about tattoos, we can talk about women's bodies, we can talk about having a womb and consent and pleasure and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe that's I don't know.
No, I would love that.
Whatever. You guys
Love
tell
that.
me.
Once the book's out,
Yeah.
we do a sort of, sorry, I don't know if Olivia can hear you. I'm just like, okay. Talking about, yeah, after the book's out, and then we can perhaps sort of explore a bit more on the spoiler side, but talk more about, you know, womanhood and all that joy that comes with it.
Yes. Yes. I would love to.
Olivia has reminded me, we need to talk about biscuits briefly though. And
am I meant to eat one while we're talking?
I mean, you can if you want to, but I don't think you need to know.
Okay, perfect.
Just your thoughts and feelings towards your chosen biscuit.
Okay, so my chosen biscuit is a staple that I grew up with here in Australia. There are probably many biscuit companies in Australia, but our kind of version of McVitie's, like in Manchester, I wasn't very far away from the McVitie's factory, and that biscuit smell was just always so good. And they're such a staple, right? They're such a staple in Britain, and our version in Australia of that kind of staple company is called Arnott's. And some listeners may know Arnott's for the famous Aussie export Tim Tams, which many, I'm sure, Australian care packages are full of that are being sent around the world. But my biscuit of choice today is one that I grew up on, and it is the humble iced Vovo. And the iced Vovo is it is like a small kind of palm-sized rectangular, your sort of bog standard biscuit. Maybe it's like a milk biscuit or just like a sugar, like it's just a sweet biscuit. But what makes the iced Vovo is that on the top it has a strip of jam with icing on either side of the jam, covered with desiccated coconuts. And I feel like it's the sleeper of iconic Australian biscuits that everybody grew up with, and is sort of like the quiet brother or sister to the Tim Tam. And I loved them. I loved them so much as a kid. It's biting into it and feeling the combination, because I'm a big texture eater. It's the combination of the crunch of the biscuit with the chewiness of the jam strip, and then the melty, pure ethanol sugar of the icing, with then the little sort of like stick in your teeth coconutty bit.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's just, the loyal kind of overlooked, but always their sibling to the Tim
always
Tam.
there.
Yeah.
So much so, loved it so much so that I found a way to include it in Esther's life, in Esther's story in the novel. So she does not go to Copenhagen without a packet of iced Vovos in her bag. And they come in good handy in a pretty terrible moment when she needs sustenance.
Yeah.
So the moral of the story is iced Vovos save your life.
Yeah.
This is not commissioned by Arnott's. Can I do? Yeah, not commissioned.
Yeah, we're
by
not sponsored in any way. Other biscuits are available.
Not sponsored. Yes, absolutely. But that is my true love for the humble iced Vovo.
Amazing. Okay, I need to get my hands on some of these, definitely. Oh, thank you so much.
I hope these. Oh, a pleasure, Lauren. Just an absolute pleasure.
Honestly, I just as you well know, I can't get emotional, but I genuinely appreciate the insight. I do, and it's wonderful to talk to you. I really want Esther to just soar. I mean, she already is. I just want people to have the privilege of knowing her, and that genuinely is what it is. It is a privilege to read, to be there with her, and I just want people to I just want to share her. I just want people to know her.
On a personal note, and without this Oh God, I don't mean this to sound trite in any way. This is this is genuine. I I went to Manchester. I went to the UK to follow my ancestry, my Celtic ancestry, and I moved to Manchester to follow this dream of this thing I've known about myself to become a writer. And living in Manchester gave me the pluck, and walking around the streets of London on my Virgin Rail ticket for day trips gave me the wonder. And I I genuinely would not be the writer that I am without that experience and without living in England as luckily and as I did. It was such a privilege. And
Mm-hmm.
it, on a personal note, my quiet but also boisterous desire is that people in the UK love Esther too. It
Mm-hmm.
it feels very full circle,
Mm-hmm.
meaningful to me, just in a very personal way, So
Mm.
uh, uh, I I think we got our first sort of proof copy review from a British reader recently, and she put the most beautiful review on Instagram. And I ran around like a soccer player with my, shirt over my head, although like not literally, just sort of honking with joy because just in a very individual, personal context, there's so much of my heart that is in the
Mm.
UK. And so
Mm.
it's beautiful to be able to talk to you and to know that you love Esther as
Oh,
you do. And
absolutely. Absolutely. And
thank
I think
you.
that's possibly part of, again, why I love it so much. It's like, she's coming home kind of thing. There is this
Yeah.
connection there that even though,
Yes.
it's not set in Manchester, it's not set in London,
Yeah.
there is a connection there. And I
Yes.
I have no doubt that, just a few miles between Australia and England, but that again, you're just connecting up all of these readers. And I think
Yes.
I love that. Yes, it has that full circle moment for you as well.
Mm,
Absolutely.
mm,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Honestly, I
Yeah.
know it's getting late for you. Thank you so, so much for taking the time. It's been
Oh,
such a lovely start to my
oh,
day.
I- oh my God, such a joy for me too. And thank you for getting up at God knows what time so that we could do this. We could all, it's
Honestly.
just
Yeah.
so
No.
gorgeous.